Leon Trotsky wrote, "Fascism comes only when the working class shows complete incapacity to take into its own hands the fate of society." Last episode, we talked about neoliberalism and how it was a response to gains made by the working class, both politically and economically, between the end of World War II and around the time of the 1970s. How it was a reassertion of class power. And now, instead of having healthcare and living wages, we all smoke vapes and want to kill ourselves. While neoliberalism brings with it ideology and anxiety, its most important tool of maintaining itself is violence. And in fact, the story of neoliberalism is one of violence. And it's a story that goes back much further than World War II. We're a country that was founded on genocide that cleared the way for plantations run on slavery. Early Puritan settlers called women witches who challenged their subordination and then hanged them.
What makes you think she's a witch? Well, she turned me into a newt.
And when the US got independence, women were denied equal rights for well over a century and a half. After slavery was abolished, segregation was established, bent on suppressing black wages, debt peonage, lynchings, race riots, mass incarceration, and disenfranchisement, while the indigenous population was relegated to reservations, and those who resisted were subject to massacres, forced relocation, and kidnapping. This extreme racial and gendered violence helped institute a deeply hierarchical and violent capitalist system. By the end of the 19th century, in proportion to population size, more workers had been killed in labor disputes in the US than anywhere outside of Tsarist Russia. According to Patricia Sexton, some 700 strikers, possibly many more, were killed between 1877 and 1968. And that doesn't include political persecution, like the hanging of the 4 anarchists in 1867 following the Haymarket Square riot, or the executing by firing squad of Industrial Workers of the World organizer Joe Hill in 1915. With World War I, the state takes it upon itself to violently dismantle organized anarchism in the US with the passing of the Espionage and Sedition Acts, leading to journalists getting beaten to death and the FBI throwing anarchists out of windows. With the Palmer raids, 10,000 immigrants are arrested and 500 were deported, including Emma Goldman, an American citizen at the time. We also see a slew of legislation and Supreme Court cases persecuting communists, barring them from federal employment and legalizing imprisonment based on political affiliations. And this was paired with McCarthyism and the House Un-American Activities Committee. Additionally, you see a slew of anti-union legislation, most notably with the Taft-Hartley Act in 1948, which leads to a drop in union membership by 12% nationwide. And this all culminates with the violent crackdown on the movements of the 1950s, 1960s, and the 1970s. In that time frame, we see things like the National Guard killing 4 anti-war protesters at Kent State, police opening fire and killing 3 young black civil rights protesters at South Carolina State College, an attack helicopter used on the American Indian movement's occupation of Wounded Knee, the NYPD conspiring to assassinate Malcolm X, Chicago police, with the help of the FBI, raiding the home of Black Panther Party leader Fred Hampton, killing his 17-year-old guard Mark Clark, then shooting Hampton while he slept, having been drugged the night before by an informant. Now, this is just a fraction of the violence, but it should be noted, this type of violence has an effect. Huey Newton concluded in his doctoral dissertation on the subversion of the Black Panther Party after cataloging a slew of offenses, from unjust arrests to assassinations, quote, "Not surprisingly, many of the tactics worked in the sense that the party lost members, leaders, and supporters, financial and otherwise." Now, through the 1970s, Leonard Peltier of the American Indian Movement and Assata Shakur of the Black Liberation Army are both imprisoned after shootouts initiated by the FBI and the police, Shakur being forced to flee to Cuba. And by 1981, following a botched robbery of a Brinks truck in Nanuet, New York, that led to the arrest and imprisonment of 11 members of the Weather Underground and the Black Liberation Army, the radicalism of the 50s, 60s, and 70s had largely been defeated. And with organized resistance out of the way, the last vestige of working class power begins to be dismantled, i.e., unionization. In the 1970s, employers start taking advantage of legislation like Taft-Hartley. In 1981, Reagan fires 11,000 striking workers of the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Association. The final nail in the coffin for labor happens in 1994, when the North America Free Trade Agreement goes into effect. As economist Kate Bronfenbrenner concluded in a study on NAFTA in 2000, quote, capital mobility and the threat of capital mobility have had a profound impact on the ability of American workers to exercise their rights to freedom of association and collective bargaining. So what's the result of all this? Between 1967 and 2010, union membership in the workforce declined from 28% to 12%, corresponding to a drop in the middle class share of aggregate income from 52% to 46%. At the same time, the most vibrant revolutionary political organizations in US history were dismantled. So I want you to think now about the relevance of what Trotsky said about fascism to the 21st century. Fascism comes only when the working class shows complete incapacity to take into its own hands the fate of society. By 2016, there was effectively no working class power to prevent Trump from taking office. Now, you may have noticed, I marked the defeat of the revolutionary organizations as completing in 1981 and the nail in the coffin for labor in 1994. So what then is the state doing roughly between the decade of the 1980s and the 2016 election? It gets rid of all its guns and riot shields because it doesn't need them anymore. It radically expands its capacity for violence. More than half of the cities in the US with more than 100,000 people had SWAT teams by 1995, while between 1984 and 1995, cities with populations between 25,000 and 50,000 see a 300% increase in SWAT teams. With the National Defense Authorization Act of 1990, George H.W. Bush allowed for transfers of military materials to local police departments, a program radically expanded in 1997 with Clinton's 1033 program. While a lot of this has to do with the war on drugs, which we'll get to, one of the repercussions of this militarization is the violent stamping out of any and all leftist, left-leaning, or working-class organizing before it can get any traction to build a national movement. For example, in 1985, police literally bombed a residential home in Philadelphia during a standoff with the revolutionary group MOVE, leading to a fire that burned 61 homes to the ground, killing 6 adults and 5 kids. To shut down Occupy Wall Street, as Naomi Wolf described it, there was, quote, violent arrests, group disruption, canister missiles to the skulls of protesters, people held in handcuffs so tight they were injured, people held in bondage till they were forced to wet or soil themselves. And a big part of this is the cultivation of sophisticated crowd control techniques. During the World Trade Organization protests, tens of thousands of people in Seattle get tear gas and pepper sprayed, some 500 of whom get arrested. And in 2014, the world was shocked by the militarized response to the Black Lives Matter protests in Ferguson, following the killing of unarmed Michael Brown. During the unrest, police shot live rounds at protesters, arrested 160 people, and drove what looked like tanks through a city in the United States of America. 1 year later, during a protest in New York over the fact that the cop who killed Eric Garner didn't receive an indictment, police used a long-range acoustic device that Physicians for Human Rights said had the ability to cause permanent hearing damage. Many crowd control techniques can prove fatal. Rubber bullets are oftentimes large metal bullets encased in rubber. Around the world between 1990 and 2017, 53 people were killed by rubber bullets, plastic bullets, and other less lethal projectiles. 3 of those killed in the US, while 300 people were permanently disabled. I was gonna end this video telling a personal story, and if you know me, maybe you thought you knew where this was going. I'm gonna hold off on it, and I'm gonna end on this point. The violent capabilities of the police don't reset every time a new administration comes into power. By allowing the state to expand its capabilities of violence, we've handed over a huge asset to the Trump administration, and we're in a bad position. This is footage I took on my phone from downtown of not just the National Guard, but also of the local police who have cracked down violently. We have failed if we've allowed our local police forces to be this militarized. And you have failed if you do not like, comment, and subscribe so that publishers will look twice at my book.